All right, good morning, everybody. Um, God bless you all. Um, decided that I was going to stay home today. Been fishing already twice this week. Huge blessing. Decided to stay home today and just rest. Um, Still not 100% over the weather. Still not. Still got a sinus issue, but hopefully I'll feel better here in a couple days. Feel better than a lot that I have been. Thank you all for all your prayers. Thank you all for just all the comments and everything. It really does. I really do appreciate it a lot. Figured that I've had questions in the past about reels I use, or the reels I use so far, and I figured I would. I'm not sponsored by Shimano, obviously. I'm just a regular guy like everybody else. I get a paycheck every couple of weeks, and I go out and have to spend my money on the equipment that I use. Just give you a little brief history. I've been bass fishing myself, as far as actually taking time to bass fish, probably 20 years. I'm gonna say 20, right at 20 years, 22 years. That's just the time that I literally had a boat of my own and was consistently going out a couple times a week, or at least once a week, to go specifically catch bass. Now, I've bass fished since I was a little boy, but sometimes we would go out, and sometimes you crappie fish, sometimes you bass fish, do different things. But I zeroed it down when I had my own way of getting to the lake, my own boat, taking my own truck and just going to the lake, and that's specifically what I was targeting, and really started to dial in, I'd say, about 22 years. Reel, of course, it's kind of obvious. Reel is very important. I mean, it's anymore, especially back in the day, you only had certain reels that you could choose from. We pretty much had the Abercrombie Garcia, the round ones, 5500, the 4600s, the little small ones that came eventually with push button on it that you could just push down, kind of like these. Then along came the way all kinds of other reels. The bad thing is that you would use them for a while, and if you truly dedicated time to bass fishing and you tried different techniques the way they're supposed to be used, at first we were all used to that 4600. We were used to there was a couple reels that came out, like Abercrombie Garcia eventually tried to come out with a low profile reel. There's a couple others that came out. Shimano was probably one of the first that really tried to come up with a little bit lower that wasn't round. Pflueger came out with one that it was a little bit lower. It wasn't that round reel. It was kind of hard to palm. But the company that I realized that if I put my money into it at the time, that it seemed like it was going to last me, because I went through a lot of different reels with Shimano. One of the things that, just to give you a little more background, one of the things is that I've owned the white Chronarchs, which a lot of people know what that is from Shimano. I've had green Cerados. I've had Cerados that were silver. I've had silver Chronarchs that came out. I've even had Calais that $300 or $400 reel. So when it comes to Shimano reels, I've had, and in baitcasters, I've had quite a few of them. This didn't wind up being my pick just because when I first got them, It didn't wind up being my pick just because I didn't know of any other type of reel. This became my pick because I knew a little bit about Shimano reels and how they're dependent, and this time around I didn't want to spend a couple $100 because eventually I wanted to get a couple different sets, so I didn't want to spend the same kind of money on them that I did. Can you go out and buy a $200 or $300 reel and it's better than this reel? Sure you can, of just about any brand. But this is just my impressions over the last 2 years. This is just my talk about this SLX and the XT. Because let's be honest, I finally came to a point in my life to where I'm like, I'm just going to go out and enjoy a good day's of fishing. I don't have to have, you know, a $800 combo just to catch a little bass. Would it be nice? Sure, but there's other things that I need. There's other things that I need to spend. It goes back to where the theory came that you can have all this nice gear, but if you don't have gas to put it in your boat at the end of the day and your truck to go fishing, then what good is it doing sitting on your shelf? That's kind of the mindset that finally came to me. A lot of people don't realize this about Shimano, but I used to, I was blessed enough as a kid that I was given a pretty nice mountain bike. And that mountain bike had Shimano gears on it to where you could shift the gears, you know, back and forth as your you know how you have on the bicycle, some of the nicer ones, brakes and everything, all that was Shimano. Well, eventually what Shimano did is they started making gears and stuff for reels, and go figure it worked because they knew pretty good how to deal with gears. They're very good about gears, and they got all that experience. A lot of people don't realize that, but they got all that experience from bicycles because it was made out of the same components pretty much. And you had your harder plastic, you had aluminum, you had all that, so it's no surprise. The only problem with Shimano's was they were very expensive. So here a couple years ago, when I got my kayak and I decided that, you know, I'm going to start fishing, but I'm going to fish normal again. Not going to get all carried away with tournaments and everything else. I'm just going to go fishing when I get a chance. I ordered from Tackle Warehouse a combo, and I did a review on it. And this was probably almost 2 years ago now when I bought this combo. I bought a SLX 7-foot medium heavy. Well, I did have a 610 fast tip before that, but didn't have it very long and sold it. Then the one that I actually talked me into getting the SLX and the Shimano's was a 7-foot medium heavy rod and a SLX 6.3, and it wasn't the XT, it was just the SLX, because it was $99 for the reel and about $99 for the rod, so it cost me about $200. Well, that's pretty much what started it all with the SLX reels. I started using different techniques, throwing little swim baits and throwing spinner baits and different things. I wanted a universal, and I always liked the jig, and I could go back and forth. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the XTs, and I'm going to talk about the SLXs. And I've had them for about 2 years, so I've got a pretty good review. This year alone, I spent at least 60 plus days on the water fishing. That's a blessing from the Lord himself. I thank Jesus for allowing me to go as many days as I have. And to be successful in those days is even a greater blessing. But I'll tell you just my experience with these reels. I've only took them apart and cleaned them maybe once or twice in those 2 years. I've used, and you've seen it throughout the videos, I've used about every bait. I've used different types of line. Now, the only line that I do not use on reels anymore, because I messed up a very nice Chronarch years ago using braided line. Just throwing something as simple as a crankbait. So I wasn't even throwing a jig on it. It was just a simple crankbait. That's one of the reasons why I don't use braid anymore on bait casters. fish pulled back. It was a pretty good one, about probably 3 pounds better. And when I pulled back, the drag just slipped completely through, and that reel from there on was always a grindy mess. Tried to take it apart and clean it, wind up almost giving it away, really. But heartbroken, of course, you can imagine. So let's talk a little bit about the SLXs. So the SLX averages about $99. Every now and then you can find them a little bit cheaper, especially used. But wonderful workhorse for anything. My suggestion is, if you get an SLX, they're very lightweight. Okay, you can look on any other video for specs. You can look. I'm just going to actually talk to you about the actual reel. My experience is, yes, it will cast little baits at a quarter, but where this reel, basically the only setting that it has, if you open up the little side plate, this is about the only setting that it has, and it has 6 little pins. I usually keep 3 on, 3 off on average. That is pretty much the only setting that you have for any type of wind resistance other than your little knob. And a lot of people don't realize this, but that little knob, all it really does is it does, when you loosen that little knob, it allows the bait to come down when you've pressed the button to release the reel. But really, in your cast itself, that little knob controls your side to side of your spool. So if you're throwing your spool and it feels like your spool is wobbling back and forth, this little knob is what you need to tighten up. If you tighten it up too much, you're not going to cast very far, because it's part of what slows the reel down before you get a backlash. The little brakes on the side, those little centrifugal brakes, the weight that they are is, depending on how many you have out, depends on how it slows, and it's way above my head, the technical part of it, but that's basically the gist of it. So that's really the only control you have in this reel. Still a very solid reel. If you're going to throw, and you'll see me, I did it a lot. If you're going to throw a topwater bait that's a 1/2 ounce or more, if you're going to throw a spinner bait, if you're going to throw a crankbait that's at least like a DT6 3/8 or more, then my suggestion is this reel is a very nice little reel to use. Anything, I would say, you can throw quarter on this reel, but its real sweet spot is 3/8 or higher. Okay, yes, it casts very far, yes, it has good tension, but it's a base $99 reel. One thing that I did do, and I messed one up doing it, is I noticed that there was a difference ever since. I fished a jig on this reel. It did okay until I started catching decent sized fish, over 3 pounds. When I caught several of them one day and I had my drag set pretty tight, I noticed a grinding in it, and I noticed that the reel, it wasn't really quite the same ever since as far as the function. I have had, and I have one in here in the house that I just saved the reel for parts, because I have several of these, that the anti-reverse in it's completely gone. Basically went to set the hook on a fish, and it pretty much, I noticed the reel started going backwards. I still got the fish in, but it just doesn't have the anti-reverse. Other than that, very solid reel. I did notice this year, using it for a jerkbait. Of course, most of my jerk baits are about a 1/2 ounce as well. I noticed on a jerk bait that whenever I would set the drag, that as I was working the jerk bait, that the line would slip, and eventually I would have to readjust the drag again, and I would have to do that every so often. So since I was having to do that, I figured it was just the reel itself. For about 2 years, it probably wore out. I did take the reel apart. A buddy of mine suggested to take the reel apart and clean the little brass bearings and clean everything in there real good, and then I watched a little video about putting grease on the actual bearing itself, and then the wheel that controls your brake system. I did that. It seems to have helped it for now. So we'll see kind of how that goes. It really operates off of a spring, and I also read a review that spring, after so long, they said then actually not to store the reels on a full drag all the time. So if you're one of those guys who likes tightening your drag all the way down, probably be a good idea every time you put your reels up to loosen your drag up, so that little spring in there doesn't get too, pretty much, I guess all the springiness gone from it. It kind of sounds silly, but that's kind of how they described it. Other than that though, like I said, we're talking about $99 for 2 years out of a reel. That, let's be honest, I'm not your average fisherman. I mean, I've like I said, I'm not one of these guys that fish 300 days out of the year, but I've fished 60 plus, and I have cranked and thrown, and I've fished it in 30 degrees, and I've fished it in 100 degrees. So to me, a huge blessing. I will say this, and it says it right on the box, man. You can look up the specs. You can open these up and look at them. Okay. The Step Up, which here you see, this one here is eventually what I did, which just a couple months later, a buddy of mine, he bought him a couple of them, and he said he was told at a tackle shop that the better bang for your buck, if you will, was the XTs. Okay, so the one I had before is just an SLX. So the SLX basically has, it's pretty much graphite. It does have a tougher frame, but it's pretty much graphite side plates. This one here seems to be a little more aluminum altogether. It's a little bit tougher built. It's still, now one of the things that it has a little bit different is the gearing system is brass. I've had these apart quite a few times. It is nice, and I've noticed a lot of brands don't do this, but when you take the side plate off, there's actually a little hinge that I think I can see there that it rides on, so that even though it's off, it's not going to fall in the lake, which is kind of nice. But when you take it off, if you notice, the XT has 4 of those little pins in it. Those little pins do the exact same function as the XT does, as the SLX does, where it has 6. The reason though, I can lock this back. Sometimes there we go. Other than that, all the same functions. Drag, the brake, this doesn't click. I mean, it's just a basic reel once again. The biggest difference, and I use this in the 6.3 to all of my reels except for 2 that I have that are newer, all of them are 6.3. Just so that way I can interchange. That's the gear that I used for the last 2 years. It's the gear that I just stuck with. This actually has here another braking system, to where I usually have on that other little spool, on that other those little pins, I usually have 2 on 2 off, usually never full with them. After I put the 2 on 2 off, and I have them opposite of each other, which I didn't explain about the 3, but I do that. I basically alternate all the way around so that it's balanced. I put 1 off, 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, and go all the way around the circle. That way I have 3 on, 3 off on that SLX. Just makes it more balanced. And then after that, I pretty much just adjust the knob, and sometimes I cast a little harder than others depending on the wind. This one has a little dial that you can reach from the outside, like a lot of other bait casters do, that you can actually adjust for windage, for weight. You can adjust different ways. It helps a little bit on this braking system. After you throw that one over there, the SLX, for a while, you kind of get used to just adjusting the little side knobs. So this is helpful a little bit. So it does help me quite a bit. That's my, as you can see, this is one of the rods that I use quite a bit. This is my DT6 that I really like that color. It's getting closer to winter, so that's usually the crankbait that I throw just about all winter long. But now this reel, I will use with jigs. Almost exclusively there for a while. I only had 1 or 2 of the XTs. and I started using them specifically for a jig. And the reason I did that is because the gear in here was a brass on brass gear. So whenever I would set the hook, it actually was a little bit tougher of a reel than the SLX. I'm not saying the SLX is not a good reel. This one at the time would run you about $130. So you were paying $30 more for the aluminum on both side plates. You were paying for a little bit better magnetic system, and you were paying for those brass gears pretty much. So it's a little bit more solid of a reel. One thing I will tell you too is that the SLX, like I was telling you about the weight of baits that to throw on it, that 3/8 and higher. Well, this reel here, I was able to throw that 1/4 to 5/16 weight and not worry about it so much. Now I'm talking about 5/16 crankbaits and different things. You could throw on that other reel a shaky head that was a 1/4 ounce shaky head, and then you put your worm on it. But you got to remember that when you already take a 1/4 ounce head and you add a worm to it, you've increased the weight over a 1/4 ounce. It may not be much, but it's more. It's heavier, it's bulkier, it's easier to throw. A lot of times people don't realize that. When you're dealing with a crankbait that's 5/16 weight, it's literally 5/16, that's it. Unless you increase the size of the hooks, you've got 5/16 for the whole package. So that's what makes the bigger difference. Plus, a crankbait has a little more wind resistance when you get ready to cast it. Sometimes it's a little harder to throw. But anyway, that's kind of my, and I've caught, once again, you can watch the videos. There's actually a video in there that I did, I think it was last year. One of the first videos that I really did at Cumberland, catching those smallmouth, that I caught just smallmouth after smallmouth after smallmouth. Most of the time when you see me catching one on a jig, until I got that Corrado that I have recently, this reel was pretty much the reel that I was using for jigs. This also started to become slowly the reel that I started using for crankbaits, because I was, especially when I was using crankbaits that were little 3/8 or less, this is the reel that I started using. I also started using this a little more when I had to do little roll cast underneath trees and stuff with certain lures, because I could adjust this little magnetic setting at the side. Had less tendencies to backlash because I could up that setting based on the lure that I put on there. Instead of readjusting the knob every time, I could just up the braking system just a little bit. So both solid reels, both, like I said, I've had for 2 years. I've got several of them. They're just a blessing to me. I just figured somebody may want to, if you're looking for a reel, or if you're thinking about buying one, thought that may be some tips to help you. I've never had to send anything back. I've never had to clean anything. Like I said, I have the one that the anti-reverse, but to me, that kind of feel like that was my fault. And you'd be surprised. If I saw these reels used somewhere, either one of them I would pick up for $50 or less. Either one of them would be a fine reel to have. If you're going to go around to that $100 range, then to me, if that's what you have as your base $100, that SLX is a decent reel. It'll meet every need you need. It'll be a good starter reel. If you could wait a couple or a week or two until you got another check and add $30, you'd be better off getting the SLX XT. That XT, you'll be a little bit more happier with it. But that's just kind of my review. That's my thoughts on the reels. Hope it blesses somebody. Hope it helps you. It's not exactly easy anymore to come up with the money to buy gear. Gear seems like it's getting more expensive every day. Try to always be thankful for what you have. That's probably my biggest thing. I'm always moving, experimenting different things. I thank the good Lord Jesus for everything I have, because years ago I wasn't smart enough to put 2 pennies in a jar. Seemed like as soon as 2 pennies hit the jar, I was ready to go find something to spend those 2 pennies on. He's blessed me a lot here lately to where I'm not going to say I've slowed down a lot, but I've slowed down a little. So I thank him very much for that. Anybody has any questions about anything, message me. I'll try my best to help you. Thank you all for sharing the videos. I hope the videos bless you. More than anything, I hope the videos remind you that Jesus loves you. Y'all have a blessed day.